Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dinosaur Facts. The reception on the last video was a little fucking mind-boggling, so thanks to everyone who watched it, and hello to all the new Norblers in training. Today we are going to go over the history of the Bone Wars. The Bone Wars was a very funny thing that happened in history, but not many people are aware of it. And today, I'm here to educate the masses. Remember to like and subscribe, or you'll find a Jeholopterus perched in your closet. The Bone Wars, or the Great Dinosaur Rush, but let's be honest, that name sucks, was a rivalry between Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. Apart from having absolutely fucking bonkers names, these two men started the most brutal battles science has ever had the privilege of watching. This is one of the craziest stories I've ever read, and I hope you're ready for some bullshit. Introducing the hero of our story, Othniel Charles Marsh grew up poor in New York State, a son of a struggling family in 1831. Marsh had a rich philanthropist uncle, however, who changed the course of Marsh's life when Marsh convinced him to build the Peabody Museum of Natural History and placed Marsh as the head. After his uncle died in 1869, he was kind of ballin' from the inheritance. He was forever indebted to his uncle, so he followed his uncle's firm anti-marriage beliefs and was a lifelong bachelor. Instead, taken by the game. And like every great story, this one has a dastardly villain. Edward Drinker Cope was born in Philadelphia in 1840. His father wanted him to be a farmer, but Cope aspired for something more illustrious. In 1864, he became a professor of zoology at Haverford College and joined Ferdinand Hayden on his expeditions west. Marsh and Cope met in Berlin in 1864 and quickly blossomed into close friends. They would spend their days together, researched fossils together, and even named species after one another. Honestly, it was kinda romantic. But soon, there was trouble in paradise. Cope was said to be pugnacious and quick-tempered, while Marsh was more methodical and introverted. They were also both described as quarrelsome and distrustful. Both looked down on each other subtly, and their relationship eventually turned sour. Later on, two scientists discovered Hadrosaurus fossils in New Jersey. This was one of the first ever fossil finds in North America, and as fate, that fickle bitch, would have it, Cope owned the land they were found in. Now, even though they had parted on somewhat friendly terms, Marsh heard this news and asked one of the scientists to divert all future fossil finds from the area to him, forever a hustler. And upon hearing this, well, Cope was pissed. Cope and Marsh started attacking each other publicly, in papers and publications. Marsh called Cope out on his stupid-ass backwards Elasmosaurus, of massive embarrassment to Cope. Things are starting to heat up, but you ain't seen shit yet. Cope was then granted a position on the U.S. Geological Survey under Hayden, a great opportunity to collect fossils and publicize his findings. He once went to a dig at the same place and at the same time as another paleontologist, which caused some pretty big issues and some major beef was a-brewing. Well, Cope was pissed, and Hayden ended up having to apologize for Cope's behavior and rationalize his actions. Later, Cope went to Blackbutt Station, which has a funny fucking name, and found Agathalmus, a dubious species of ceratopsid. After this find, Cope assumed that he and he alone would be digging in this area. However, upon arrival, he was forever shocked to find many different groups of fossil hunters already there. Cope quickly put together a team of 7 men, 2 of which he soon discovered were on Marsh's payroll. Well, Cope was pissed, but the men insisted they were loyal. However, one actually claimed that he was there to lead him away from the good fossils, so I don't know. The reason they were looking for extra work at all in the first place was due to Marsh's laziness when it came to actually, paying his employees. But really, we can't pin that on him. He's got more important shit to be doing, to be honest. Meanwhile, one of Marsh's men accidentally sent a shipment of fossils to Cope. However, at this point in the timeline, Cope was still enough of a gentleman to send them back, but probably not before doing unspeakable things to them. Cope and Marsh both continued to make meaningful discoveries of ancient reptiles and mammals. However, the two were quite hasty in an attempt to outcompete each other and all the other fossil hunters. This led to many new species that later became invalid. In the end, most of Marsh's discoveries were kept valid, but not a single species described by Cope was accepted. I don't know about you, but to me, That smells of Major L. This allowed Marsh to declare a new order of mammals, Dinosaur, which contained some weird fucking creatures. Well, Cope was pissed and released a new broad analytical study where he completely reclassified Marsh's order and chose his species instead of Marsh's. Marsh contested this and it didn't hold up for long, but still, that is an insane level of pettiness. In 1873, Marsh made his last fossil dig backed by Yale University, where he took a bunch of students as well as a group of soldiers as a show of force to the Native Americans or something. I don't know. The students paid their own way, over $45,000 each in today's money, due to Marsh's extravagant expeditions in the past, which hurt his pocketbook just a little too much. Cope, meanwhile, got tired of Hayden's shit and quit to work for the Army Corps of Engineers, which took away from the time where he was able to hunt for fossils. Marsh attempted to move further west to find fossils, but at the time there were tensions between the Native Americans and the government. Marsh personally went to Chief Red Cloud, said he would pay for fossils found, and advocate for his people in D.C. Well, forever a smooth talker, Marsh reportedly left the camp with cartloads of fossils. At this point, both Marsh and Cope had a large supply of fossils and needed to return to catalog them. They were both also feeling the financial strain from their expeditions, but soon they'd be back. You can take the dog out of the game, but you can't take the game out of the dog. In 1877, Marsh received a tip of a vertebrae and humerus of a, quote, big fucking creature from Colorado. The man who found them returned and dug up more, and since Marsh was slow to respond, he sent samples to both Marsh and Cope. Once Marsh finally got off his lazy ass and responded, he paid the man $100 to keep it quiet, which, I mean, he kind of fucked already, but Marsh sent a man named Lakes, and Marsh was able to publish the study before Cope with Lakes' findings. Lakes then insisted that Cope send the fossils he had received back to Marsh. Cope, however, was making his own luck. He received a tip of fossils near Canyon City, which he determined were from the largest herbivore ever discovered at that time. Marsh heard about this, got two guys to set up a quarry, and tried to persuade the man working for Cope to work for him, though he refused. Then Marsh had to deal with some bullshit when one of his fucking quarries collapsed and almost killed a bunch of his assistants or something. At this point, his bone supply was almost dry, hadn't it been for Reed and Carlin. Reed and Carlin were two workers who claimed to find lots of fossils near Como Bluff while working on a railroad. These men were using fake names, so don't worry about that, it's not really important, and claimed there were already people poking around. Marsh sent his man Williston, who had just finished running around for Marsh in Canyon City and in Kansas at his quarry collapse. Williston did end up finding fossils at Como Bluff, along with Cope's men. Marsh quickly sent money to Reed and Carlin and got them to send back samples. Marsh received many fossils from Como Bluff, including dinosaurs that would soon be named Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Allosaurus. However, Reed and Carlin were not overly happy with their situation with Marsh, and intentionally spread rumors of Marsh's presence. Cope heard, and well, Cope was pissed. The boys leaked info to a local newspaper, which Marsh tried to cover up. Cope sent his Dinosaur rustlers to the region, which, can we talk about how that is the coolest fucking job title ever conceived? Anyway, Cope sent his Dinosaur rustlers to the region to stealthily steal bones from Marsh's dig sites. By winter of 1878, Carlin was not happy with Marsh's sporadic payment schedule and left Marsh to work for Cope. And well, Cope was delighted. For the next few years, Marsh and Cope spent their summers digging and winters publishing their findings. Small armies of fossil hunters would carry literal tons of fossils back east in mule-drawn carts. Cope and Marsh's workers suffered not only from weather, but also from sabotage. You see, there were accusations from both sides that the other was sabotaging the other's digs, which they were. They also accused each other of spying, destroying fossils, bribery, and more, and yeah, they fucking did that shit. There were spies paid to check on each other's findings. The two men would fill in old dig sites just to keep them from each other. There was even a time where a group of Marsh's workers and a group of Cope's workers started a rock fight. Keep in mind, grown-ass men, so mad over fucking dinosaurs they started throwing rocks at each other's skulls. Even Reed and Carlin, formerly the best of friends, had turned against one another, now working for rival bosses. Cope and Marsh were taking advantage of this as well, as Carlin was asked to build a quarry for Cope near Como Bluff, and Reed was asked to spy on Carlin by Marsh. Reed became Marsh's right-hand man. Marsh started asking Reed to clear out all the bone fragments from neighboring quarries, and Reed must have really liked that idea because he proceeded to destroy every single bone in all the nearby quarries to keep them out of Cope's hands. This was a practice Cope's men soon adopted as well, but after strangers started encroaching on their fossil turf, and both Lakes and Marsh had to visit, Lakes and Reed threatened to resign. Marsh was able to convince Reed to stay. To replace Lakes, Marsh hired Kennedy, but Kennedy was a bad boy, and didn't feel he needed to report to Reed, which caused them to fight so much that other workers quit just so they didn't have to deal with their shit. Cope's workplace relationships went better, but eventually his own digging slowed and Carlin quit. Eventually, Carlin and Williston's brother founded a bone company to sell to the highest bidder, which is a hell of a business opportunity if you ask me. Reed also left Marsh's operation in 1884, and soon after, Marsh's Como Bluff quarries failed. Marsh, however, still had more active dig sites than Cope, who at that time had more fossils than he could fit into a single house. Cope was losing the bone war. Both men began trying to ruin each other's professional reputation. After Marsh pointed out Cope's backwards Elasmosaurus, Cope attempted to buy every book that contained his error, and Marsh did his best to push it back out to the public. Cope published many papers, and quickly. Marsh used this to his advantage, as he would painstakingly point out every minute law in all of Cope's papers. Marsh made his own errors too, though, at one point placing a Camarasaurus skull on an Apatosaurus head. And when he found a complete Apatosaurus skeleton with the correct skull, he named that Brontosaurus. Marsh began working with John Wesley Powell in the U.S. Geological Survey, and Cope, the hater that he was, teamed up with Henry Fairfield Osborne to ruin Marsh once and for all. Cope kept an elaborate diary of all of Marsh and Powell's mistakes and misdeeds under their survey, which he kept in the bottom drawer of his goddamn dresser. Arguments with the newspapers began between Cope, Powell, and Marsh, and the New York Herald published an article about them called "Scientists Wage Bitter Warfare." The rest of the scientific community watched in shock and considered the whole situation cringy and not cool. They were reportedly embarrassed to see them quoted, mentioned, and often misspelled in Cope and Marsh's arguments. However, many had still already taken a side. I like to think that they bet on it like a horse race, but there are no reports of this. Cope attacked Marsh for plagiarism and financial mismanagement. Powell was attacked for his geological classification errors and misspending of government funds. However, Cope didn't come out looking good either, as his articles were not written well at all, and the university he worked for at the time were intending on firing him if he did not provide evidence for his claims. Marsh was about the drama at this point in his life, and attempted to keep the story going, but it eventually fizzled out, with nothing really having changed besides bruised egos and professional embarrassment. After this incident, Powell found himself under much more scrutiny, because the IRS doesn't like the words misspending, government, or funds. Powell also demanded that Marsh resign, which was definitely personal. Marsh had to step down as head of the Academy of Sciences, and many of his employees had retired or died. But on the bright side, Marsh did receive the Cuvier Medal, the highest award in paleontology, which I didn't know about till now, so that's pretty cool. Cope was granted a position at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and became a professor of zoology. Cope's finances eventually dropped again after a poor investment opportunity, his inability to find work, apparently due to his temper, and he developed a debilitating illness. He was forced to sell all of his assets, besides his fossil collection, because you don't let go of that. Marsh was also financially ruined around the same time as this. He had to mortgage his house and ask Yale for his salary. But if they had nothing else, they always knew they had each other. And well, Cope was still pissed. Their rivalry lasted right up until Cope's death in 1897, but Cope was not planning on going out with one final fuck you. Cope's final challenge to Marsh was issued soon before his death. Cope donated his brain to science and asked Marsh to do the same thing upon his death. He then asked the University of Pennsylvania to measure their fucking brain cases to see who had a bigger brain. And that, kids, is a standard of villainy that we can only aspire to live up to. Marsh never accepted, and Cope's skull still sits in the University of Pennsylvania. However, there is a bit of confusion. The university claims that they lost the skull in the 70s, which, like, what the fuck? But this guy named Robert Backer claims that there's sufficient evidence to prove that one of the skulls there is Cope's. So that's cool, but how the fuck do you lose a skull? Like, what? Based purely on numbers, Marsh won the Bone Wars, as he discovered 80 species compared to Cope's 56. To be fair, though, Marsh did have more men and money at his disposal, and Cope had broader paleontological interests than Marsh. But that's Cope, double meaning, if you use that argument, and you're a pussy, sorry. These two men did help the field of paleontology, raising the number of dinosaurs discovered in North America from the previous number of 9. They also contributed to the public popularity of dinosaurs. Marsh argued that birds are descended from dinosaurs, which is insane and way ahead of his time. However, their childish arguments hurt the reputation of American paleontologists. They also damaged many of their finds from using dynamite and sabotage. Haphazardly assembled skeletons, incorrectly described species, and hasty classifications led to confusion for years after their deaths. And Leedy, who I have not mentioned at all until this point, was actually incredibly important to the story, but was never mentioned even once in Marsh or Cope's work, and died in obscurity. But to be honest, he was a boring side character anyway, so I mean... The Bone Wars was a crazy little debacle that shook up the paleontological world, and is still interesting to look back on today. Whose side are you on? Let me know in the comments, unless you're on Cope's, because I don't want to fucking hear about it. Have a good one, boys. Bye.